Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to the B segment of episode 29 of The Loud House, Brawl in the Family. We begin this segment with Lincoln noticing that the Loud House is unusually quiet now. After he makes this observation, he heads off to the kitchen to get something to eat, but Luna is just outside the entrance to the kitchen, and she blocks Lincoln's path from going in there, saying that Lori is in there to cool off after an argument that she had with Leni over something. Lincoln assures Luna that he just wants to go in real quick just to get something to eat, and he'll be on his way. But Lisa offers him a bagel instead to keep him from going in the kitchen. It's only after taking one bite of the bagel does Lincoln realize that it's not a very sanitary bagel, and Lisa even admits that she found it under the couch cushions. Understandably so, Lincoln rushes off to the bathroom, but Lana is blocking him from entering the bathroom, saying that Leni is in there to cool off after this argument that she had with Lori, this argument between Lori and Leni. So Lana offers Lincoln a bucket instead. Later on, Lynn, Lucy, and Lola are now in the living room. Lincoln enters the living room as well, and he's about to watch a monster truck rally. But when he reaches for the remote, the three sisters present beat him up over it and say that he can't watch the monster truck rally because it might provoke Lori and Leni over this argument that they had. And finally, Lincoln questions, what is this argument about? We then see a flashback which shows Lori and Leni both they both have their own copy of a dress. So they both have their own pair of a dress, or they each have their own copy of the same dress, and they're arguing over who gets to keep the dress versus who has to return the dress. Lincoln points out that this is an incredibly petty argument and that it is interfering with the rest of their lives. It's interfering with them going about their everyday activities in the house. And Lincoln thinks that they should do something about this. The sisters present respond to Lincoln that they have a system already organized, a sister fight protocol, and they tell Lincoln to butt out of the conflict because it's a sister thing. Lincoln, though, after again pointing out how this is interfering with their everyday lives, he storms off to confront Lori and Leni about this argument of theirs. They don't seem to be at each other's necks, though, when he enters the room, and they seem like they're trying to tell him something, but Lincoln doesn't catch on to this as he's trying to suggest ideas for why one of the sisters should keep the dress versus why the other sister should return the dress. And we see it both ways. Lori and Leni in one way, Lori and Leni in the opposite way. Unfortunately, though, Lincoln brings up how Lori and Leni have said some unflattering comments about one another regarding fashion, and it's only then after we find out that Lori and Leni had apparently mended fences, but now Lincoln, despite his good intentions, accidentally reignited the conflict between them. The other sisters are angry with Lincoln, telling him he should have butt out and saying that they will handle this with the sister fight protocol. Lisa even has a graph where she describes the threat levels with analogies such as cats in an argument with each other, or T-Rexes stomping around, or volcanoes. You get the idea. So Lincoln does mind his own business. He's staying out of this conflict. He's just in his room doing his own thing. But then some of the sisters come in his room and they kick him out to put one of the feuding sisters in his room so that the other feuding sister can walk through the hallway without having to confront the other feuding sister. And this happens again when, anytime the one of the feuding sisters is walking in the hall while the other feuding sister is in the hall, they kick Lincoln out of his room to put one of the feuding sisters in there. And the parents are aware of the sister fight protocol too, because we find out during dinner time, and strangely enough, Lincoln's at the adult table, even though he no longer was at the end of A Tale of Two Tables, but I digress. Anyway, the point was Lincoln finds out they have to have dinner twice in one day. Once while Lori is present and once while Leni is present. Again, so the two feuding sisters don't have to eat dinner together, and they claim everyone else has to because they don't want the feuding sisters to think that any of them are taking sides or playing favorites. And then later on still, we find out that some of the other sisters took Lincoln's bed sheets and his blankets to act as a divider in Lori and Leni's room. And when Lincoln questions what is he supposed to do about bed, they just throw dirty laundry on his bed to say he can sleep in that. Understandably so, Lincoln is once again annoyed how this protocol is interfering in their everyday lives, and he intends to do something about it, despite the other sisters being against the idea. And when Lincoln takes back his bed sheets and his blankets, Lori and Leni refuse to sleep in the same room with one another. So Lincoln suggests that Luna sleep with Lori in Lori and Leni's room, while Leni sleeps with Luann in Luna and Luann's room for the night, hoping that a night apart will be enough to let them cool off. The other sisters go along with it, but they still make their disapproval of the idea to Lincoln apparent and accuse him of playing with fire. The next day rolls around, and we do hear arguing, but it's not Lori and Leni's arguing that we hear. Luna and Luann are now arguing with each other. Apparently, the feuding sister that they each spent the night with told their side of the story, and so now they're arguing about who's in the right versus who's in the wrong. So Luna is taking Lori's side while Luann is taking Leni's side. So they say the threat level has escalated, and the sisters, once again, the non-feuding sisters, insist again that they should let them handle this, let the sister fight protocol handle this, and they again tell Lincoln to just butt out, and well, we see that the problems continue anyway. Each of the twins are escorting one of the feuding sisters around the house, and they try to mention these coordinates so that they don't bump into each other, but they end up bumping into each other anyway. So now the twins are fighting each other now. And apparently Bobby's aware of the sister fight protocol too, because he's delivering pizzas, and well, the parents and Lily are taking shelter in the parents' bedroom right now, and the parents have Bobby bring one of the pizza boxes to them through the bedroom window, and they pay and tip him there. And they tell him for the rest of the pizzas, just leave him on the porch, ring the doorbell, and run for his life, which Bobby does. And then Lynn takes a break to eat some of the pizza. Lucy complains about Lynn slacking off, and this leads to Lynn getting angry at Lucy, and then they're fighting now. And Lisa says that the conflict has escalated even further, and now the other sisters are annoyed of her pointing this out, so now 9 of the 10 Loud sisters are fighting with each other. Lincoln contacts Clyde with his walkie-talkie to request that he spent the night over at Clyde's for the time being, and Clyde obliges. So while he's at Clyde's house, Clyde is following Dr. Lopez's example. He's playing the therapist while Lincoln is the person who vents his frustrations to the therapist. Lincoln thinks he can solve this problem, but if they would just let him solve it, and he intends to return home to try and solve the conflict, after hoping that a day after this that a night with him away for a while will give him time to think of a strategy. So the next day rolls around, and Lincoln has a megaphone with him to call out to his sisters that he intends to help them, and he's coming in, and he uses a trash can lid as a shield. But when he enters the house, he notices that they're not fighting anymore, and the sisters say that they resolved their conflict. Even a compromise with the dress has been reached. Lenny says that Lori will get to wear the dress on every day that ends with a Y, while Lenny will get to wear the dress the rest of the time, but Lincoln's expression indicates that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And when Lincoln questions how they solved it, they said Lincoln solved it by not actually solving it, saying that Lincoln not being around was what solved it, because they blamed Lincoln for the conflict, saying that it would solve itself if he butt out, and saying that he needs to respect the sister fight protocol. And Lincoln accepts this and says he'll stay out of it if any of the sisters feud again, and he accidentally brings up some other unflattering comments that was said among different Loud sisters, and now the 9 of them have started a new conflict, and they're fighting each other. So the segment ends with Lincoln taking shelter with his parents and Lily in the parents' bedroom. Boy howdy, this is one of the most notorious segments of the Loud House. Many fans regard this as their second least favorite segment, and at least as of the recording of this video, and I have to agree with those sentiments. This was not a good segment. I wasn't looking forward to covering this segment, but I did say I would cover them all, so I have to soldier on. So let's get this over with. Now, let me start by saying that this is another example where there was a good idea or a good lesson in mind. It was the execution that was the problem. And in the case for Brawl in the Family, the lesson about how there are some conflicts that you should stay out of and you should let simmer down on their own accord, that's a perfectly valid lesson. The problem, of course, was the execution. And part of that problem as well was similar to both segments of episode 12, at least if you were to ask me about those segments or that episode. I felt both segments of episode 12, Along Came a Sister and Chores and Peace, were examples where Lincoln made a valid point, but the segment kind of glossed over or ignored it just to paint Lincoln as being in the wrong. I felt that was the case here too. Because, well, the problem I had with this segment was, and many people for that matter, is they tried to act like that Lincoln was the sole problem of the conflict, and that the conflict resolving itself because Lincoln wasn't around was how they tried to further that point. But I don't agree with that, and not many other fans do. And let's make this clear. I'm not saying that Lincoln wasn't I'm not saying Lincoln was blameless in this conflict. I recognize Lincoln was partially at fault for the conflict because he did accidentally reignite the conflict between Lori and Lenny. But at the same time, I do still recognize that Lincoln did have good intentions and he meant well. And Lincoln did have a valid point. Lincoln was right about the fact that the sister fight protocol was a faulty system. It was just a flawed protocol that ended up causing its share of problems too. But the segment glossed over or ignored that, just saying, "Oh, it's all Lincoln's fault. The protocol was perfect if he butts out." And the frustrating part is there actually are some fans out there who seem to believe that too. Some fans that insist Lincoln was entirely at fault for the conflict by saying how arrogant he was to think he could solve everything, and ignoring the fact that the sister fight protocol was flawed. And sure, it would be dishonest to say that Lincoln didn't cause any problems in this segment, but at the same time, it would be just as dishonest to say Lincoln was entirely at fault for the conflict, and it would be just as dishonest to say that the sister fight protocol was flawless, because it was a flawed system. And even before Lincoln accidentally reignited the conflict, we did see how this protocol was flawed. As Lincoln said, it was interfering with the family's everyday lives. Because even earlier in the segment, now here's an example of good idea, bad execution, with Lori and Leni being separated in different rooms to cool off. That's not a bad idea. Having feuding people cool off in separate rooms is a good idea. The problem was they chose the kitchen and the bathroom to be the rooms where they cool off. People gotta eat, and nature and people have to answer nature's calling. Let's leave it at that. So choosing the kitchen and the bathroom was, bad idea. I mean, if they really wanted to, they could have tried maybe the basement or the basement and the attic maybe. At least you wouldn't expect anyone else to need to go into those areas necessarily too often, I imagine. Or it'd be less intrusive than the kitchen or the bathroom, I imagine, if you really had to give them an entire room to themselves. And the other problem was, as Lincoln pointed out, why did they keep using his bedroom to house one of the feuding sisters to keep her from interacting with the other feuding sister as the other feuding sister was walking down the hallway? Again, why didn't they use a room that no one would be using too often? And why did they use his bed sheets and his blanket as a divider? Why didn't they use any spare sheets or spare blankets? I know they're a big family, but I imagine there'd be some extras or spare ones lying around. Because the second time around, Lincoln didn't get involved again until after they kind of intruding upon his own time, or intruding upon his property to continue with the sister fight protocol. So it wasn't difficult to understand why Lincoln felt compelled to get involved again. And the problem about them saying Lincoln was entirely at fault at the conflict, because other people pointed out that after he made the suggestion that Luna and Luann each sleep with one of the feuding sisters, so that Lori and Leni wouldn't have to sleep in the same room together while they were angry, he stopped being involved after that. Afterwards, the sister fight protocol was kind of unraveled. And actually, it should be pointed out, there was some hypocrisy in this segment. The sisters criticized Lincoln for not butting out of the conflict, and yet Luna and Luann didn't. They butted into this conflict they took sides over the conflict, Luna siding with Lori and Luann siding with Leni. And I think just saying having Lincoln's idea to have them sleep in the same room, I don't think that necessarily I find that a pretty flimsy justification to blame Lincoln, because that was Luna and Luann's own choice to get involved in the conflict. And the sister fight protocol itself was what led to the rest of the sisters feuding with each other. So, again, I don't deny that Lincoln partially was at fault, even though he did have good intentions. But at the same time, I don't agree with how they try to act like it was all his fault, and they try to ignore that the sister fight protocol was just a bad protocol. And it seemed pretty unusual that they would tell Bobby, of all people, but not Lincoln, their own brother. I mean, I imagine, yeah, Lori telling Bobby about this is believable, but why wouldn't they tell their own brother about this protocol? Why is Lincoln unaware of this protocol like we, the audience, are unaware of it? And their only response to him is stay out of it and shut up, essentially. They don't bother to tell him anything. Another example of poor communication causing problems for everyone. And I think part of the problem, too, was, we've never seen this sister fight protocol being used before, because we already had a segment with sisters sharing a room that feuded with each other, Lynn and Lucy in Space Invader, and there was no sign of the sister fight protocol, so suddenly it shows up, and I suppose that segment also is why this one was sort of a sore spot for people, because this segment did kind of portray it as, oh, Lincoln getting involved in the conflict is why it worsened, and that he should never get involved in conflicts with his sisters, even though in Space Invader, the only reason that the conflict ended was because Lincoln got involved. Well, granted, he was inadvertently dragged into it by Lynn when she wanted to stay in his room while she was feuding with Lucy, but you get the idea. And again, that's not to say the lesson about there are some conflicts you shouldn't get involved in. I mean, it is a valid lesson. You should be able to distinguish, okay, you should get involved in this conflict. This is one you shouldn't get involved in. But the way how they made it seem a little too extreme, making it seem like it was bad that Lincoln gets involved in any conflict or being... I think it's also this segment that kind of reinforced how some of the more extreme viewers might insist that Lincoln is the cause of all conflicts in the series. Again, you don't hear that as much, or you don't tend to hear those extreme thoughts as often as the sisters are pure or evil incarnate, while Lincoln is a faultless martyr extreme mindsets. But it's there. I've seen those extreme mindsets from opposite sides. And well, there you have it. Yeah, this was just a very flawed segment. It had some good ideas, but again, the execution was badly done, and it was another case of Lincoln gets all the blame for a conflict that he was only partially at fault for, and they did gloss over his valid points that this protocol was just not a good system whatsoever. It's not hard to understand why there are so many fan works dedicated to addressing the problems with this segment. So, yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that I favor the A segment over the B segment in regards to episode 29. And, well, finally we've discussed this segment, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. So, there you go. We've discussed both segments of episode 29 on this channel now. Take care, and until next time.